Naruko, bring me that hammer, why don't you? Kiba shouted down from one of Konoha's rooftops. In the direct wake of the attack on Konoha, every able-bodied person was tapped to help with the reconstruction. The members of Team 10, minus an injured Sakura, were no exception. Coming! Naruko shouted down from the ground, and a strand of black hair elongated to wrap around the building utensil and brought it to him. Naruko was busy getting a fence back up that had been knocked loose when one of the sand summons had rampaged through. And yes, black hair. Everybody knew Naruko had lost control of the Kyuubi for a time, and the distrust and fear of her was at an all-time high. And so she had taken to wearing a constant disguise. Kiba himself wasn't worried about Naruko. Akamaru still liked her, and that was all Kiba needed to know, that she was still cool. At the end of their shift, Naruko asked for both him and Asuma to stay behind for a while. "Alright kiddo, what is it?" Asuma asked. Even to Kiba's eyes, Naruko looked very uncomfortable. "I fear I may soon be leaving Team 10. It took a few seconds for that to sink in. "Wait, what? You can't just leave?" "Kiba," Asuma said warningly. "What? You can't tell me you're fine with this." "I think we need to give her the time to explain her reasoning first." Asuma turned to face her. "Well, Naruko?" "Yes, well, Jiraiya of the Sunniness offered to make me his personal apprentice." Kiba waited for more, but none was forthcoming. "That's it. You're just going to ditch Asuma now that you've gotten the attention of someone better." "That's not it. Not exactly," Naruko said. But since he didn't seem able to say what it was exactly, Kiba wasn't exactly placated. "I could believe you might want to abandon me and Asuma, but what about Sakura?" "Kiba," Asuma said, again in that same tone. "This was always a likely possibility." "What?" "Genin teams aren't permanent, Kiba. The key is in the name. Genin teams. If the Chunin exams were able to progress as normal, then chances are Naruko and maybe Sakura as well would have been promoted. The moment that happened, Team 10 would have been officially disbanded." "But that's crazy. There are lots of famous teams who stuck together long into their careers," Kiba said. Even he knew that much. "And there is nothing to say we can't still go on missions together," Naruko said. "But as I understand it, the majority of my time will be spent studying under Jiraiya from now on." "Still doesn't feel right," Kiba said. It all still seemed very ungrateful to Kiba for Naruko to just ditch Asuma now that she had the attention of someone more famous. "I can't keep going as I have," Naruko said. "I need to become as strong as possible, as fast as possible, and yeah, I know how that sounds. But it isn't as bad as you think. I'll explain everything later, but just know that I'll need to progress fast. Faster than you or Sakura may be able to keep up." If Naruko was going to be becoming stronger even faster than she already was, then Kiba had to reluctantly accept her point. Though his pride hurt to admit it, she was already progressing faster than him before now. "I'll hold you to giving that explanation," Kiba grumbled. Naruko nodded. "Please, if you've got the time, join me when I go visit Jiraiya. I'm inviting someone else as well. I don't feel like telling this story more than a few times." Naruko figured it was yet another testament to her father's skills that nobody who had known him in life was even a little surprised by him infusing a part of his spirit into the seal. Because, of course Minato would do something like that. She told most of what her father had shared with her with her whole team, Jiraiya, and she had also invited Kakashi for good measure. Naruko figured that as a student of his, Kakashi might want to know all this. She left out some of the more personal things, though she would share those later with Sakura, but for the stuff with the masked man, she left nothing out. "During my search for Orochimaru, I discovered that he briefly joined a certain organization. An organization comprised of at least 9 S-rank criminals," Jiraiya said. "Seriously?" Are there even that many S-ranked criminals in the world? Asuma asked. His incredulity was understandable. S-ranked shinobi. A large ninja village could count themselves lucky if they got one or two of those ninjas in a single generation, so those didn't exactly grow on trees. I shared your surprise, believe me, Jiraiya said. We don't know much about them, but what we do know lines up with what Minato's spirit told Naruko. After all, it would take someone truly powerful to keep that many powerful criminals in line. Those types tend to only listen to those that are even stronger than them. Naruko, Sakura and Kiba all shared a look. All three of them felt like this was something way out of their league. So Naruko needs to be kept safe in the village? Kiba asked. For a group like that, even kidnapping someone in the middle of a ninja village isn't that big of a challenge. No, the best protection we can offer her is for nobody to know where she is and where she is going. That and, of course, being near my magnificent self. Even the worst criminals would pause at the prospect of having to mess with the mighty Toad Sage. Jiraiya laughed, but it turned into a cough when his injuries acted up. Now you see why I must leave Team 10, Naruko asked. Is there anything we can do to help? Kiba asked. No! Every adult in the room said simultaneously. Your bravery is commendable, kid. I'm sure your sensei is very proud of you, Jiraiya said. But you're in way over your head. But Naruko is going to have to fight someday, isn't she? So why can't we help her? She has advantages that you don't have, Jiraiya said carefully. Ah, this is about her being some kind of prodigy, right? Kiba said bitterly. It's not that simple, but there is a small grain of truth to it, Jiraiya said reluctantly. It is my firm belief that everybody can grow powerful if they work hard enough, but that takes time. Time you likely don't have. As I said, I'm going to have to progress fast. Maybe faster than you can keep up, Naruko repeated. Either that or die. She looked down at her feet. She hated this. Kiba looked at Sakura. And you're fine with this? Sakura wasn't, and didn't intend to abandon her friend, no matter how hopeless her odds of success looked. However, she also didn't want Kiba to use her as an excuse to throw his life away. It was hypocritical of her, sure, but whatever. Sakura just shrugged her shoulder and happily used the excuse of her recent injuries to not give a detailed reply. Well, I'm not fine with this, Kiba said. I don't care how tough these guys are. If they think they can just take Naruko, they've got another thing coming. An agreeable woof came from Akamaru atop Kiba's head. I'm not stupid. I know I may not be able to compete with the world's most powerful, but I can at least help you find them, or give you warning of when they are coming. That's my job, isn't it, as a tracker? Jiraiya, while still thinking involving another genin into this mess a horrendously bad and irresponsible idea, he had to smile at this show of loyalty. He turned to Naruko. You've chosen some good friends. I've just been lucky. I've always been lucky in that regard. Still, both she and Sakura were somewhat hesitant about Kiba's enthusiasm. Or rather, they felt guilty about it. Guilty about the fact that Naruko and Sakura felt more loyalty to each other than to Team 10 as a whole, which included Kiba and Asuma. There was nothing either of them could do about that though. Naruko, I do have a question about your conversation with Minato-sensei, Kakashi said, and Naruko gave him her attention. Did he mention me at all? Yes, he said you and Jiraiya were adults that I could rely on. Naruko lied. Given the way he looked, Naruko didn't have the heart to tell him Minato hadn't even name-dropped him. Then again, they had been pressed for time, so maybe he was the third best person her dad wanted her to put her faith into? She didn't know, but she did trust Kakashi. Thank you. It goes without saying that if you need my help with anything, don't hesitate to ask. I feel like my position is being threatened, Asuma said half-jokingly. But seriously, you can count on all of us to help you whenever we can. I'm in your debt. Naruko said with a small bow of her head. No, for me this is just a debt being repaid. But there is another matter, Kakashi said. Naruko, Sakura, how long will the two of you be staying at the hospital? Well, Sakura is free to leave tonight actually. She's still far from fully recovered, but the doctors say she can recover at home. Both of us will stay here until visiting hours are over though, Naruko said. Good. Kakashi smiled mysteriously and then excused himself to relay some information. What was that all about? Naruko wondered. Kakashi was clearly up to something, but whatever it was, it probably wasn't anything bad. We may have to leave sooner than expected, Jiraiya said once it was just him and Team 10. He would prefer if they weren't here for this, since the fewer people who knew what they were going to be up to, the better. He knew though that Naruko would automatically share any of their plans with Sakura, regardless of danger, so it was pointless to keep her out of it. Asuma could be trusted to keep his mouth shut, and the Inuzuka? Jiraiya was admittedly not sure about him yet, though his heart seemed to be in the right place. You're hardly fit to travel, Naruko pointed out. I can walk, and events are moving fast around us. With the Leaf Village in disarray, they want to name a new Hokage to lead us. And I've been offered the position. Everyone present drew in a sharp breath. Naturally, I turned them down. You did what? Kiba shouted. What? I've got more important stuff to do. Like what? Doing research? Asuma asked with audible air quotes. That too, of course, but I was referring to training her. He motioned towards Naruko. If I'm supposed to get her to be as good as her father, let alone better, then that's going to require most of my attention for the next few years. Thank you, Naruko thought. As far as showing that you care, turning down the most prestigious position in Konoha down to train and look after her was more than she could dream of. But if I can't become the Hokage, I'm going to need to find someone who can, and fast. Who? Naruko asked. Well, they want a Sannin, and if I can't do it... Jiraiya trailed off with a sly smile. Tsunade! Naruko shouted and exchanged excited glances with Sakura. Tsunade was a role model for young Konohachis in Konoha, including Naruko and Sakura. Great, when are we leaving? Jiraiya paused. He got the feeling that "we" included a lot more people than he wanted it to. You and I are leaving tomorrow morning. Just you and me? Naruko asked, much of her enthusiasm leaving. I see no reason to take more people, and Sakura is injured. Less so than you, Sakura insisted. My legs are fine. I can walk. And I'm a tracker. If you're trying to find someone, then you'll want me, Kiba said. You're an Inuzuka. You can follow a physical trail well enough, but this will be a different sort of tracking. We don't need you, and I don't want to babysit more kids than I have to, Jiraiya said. And there's plenty to do around the village for Sakura and Kiba, Asuma said. And getting Naruko out of the village for a while may calm some people. But... Naruko began, looking at Sakura. She didn't want to leave her behind, but was finding it hard to come up with good reasons for why she had to come that didn't sound childish. It's alright, Sakura said. Naruko had a pained look, but didn't argue further. Jiraiya nearly changed his mind based on how miserable Naruko looked, but he really saw no reason for why Sakura needed to come. Besides, he planned to take Naruko on a very long training trip soon, so she'd have to say goodbye to Sakura for a few years anyway. Better she got used to it. And with that, Team 10 dispersed. Asuma went back to be with his family. Considering he had just lost his father, that was more than understandable. This reminded Naruko that she should really go see Konohamaru soon to see how he was handling losing his grandfather. But with her time in the village so short, she wanted to spend what time she had left with her closest friend. Selfish, maybe, but well. After everything that happened, she needed some comfort too. Kiba returned home and Sakura and Naruko retreated to Sakura's hospital room, planning to stay for a few more hours before being dismissed and then return to Sakura's home. It had been too long since they'd had a proper sleepover. But first, about half an hour after they left Jiraiya, Naruko and Sakura heard a knock on the door of their hospital room. "Come in," Naruko said. The door was hesitantly pushed open and pale, pupilless eyes peeked through the small opening. "Ah, Hinata," Naruko said. The last time she had seen her, Naruko had wanted to rip her to shreds. But right now, after everything that happened, she found that most of her anger had left her. That said, she didn't really want to deal with her right now. "May I come in?" Hinata asked. Sakura and Naruko exchanged looks, and it might as well have counted for a 2-minute conversation with how much information they were able to convey. That information boiled down to Naruko telling Sakura that she had every right to be angry and tell Hinata to go away, while Sakura didn't want to hold a grudge and wanted Naruko to play nice. "Sure," Naruko eventually said. Hinata still seemed hesitant to come in, until she was given a small push forward that sent her stumbling into the room, an annoyed-looking Shikamaru trailing behind her. "I brought flowers," Hinata said, and she indeed had a small vase with her. From the way she presented it, it almost seemed like she was trying to offer a bribe for her life. Naruko found more and more of her hesitance when it came to her old classmate evaporating every moment. She pointed towards a small nightstand, and Hinata deposited her gift there. She next tried to sit beside the window, next to Shikamaru, who had already taken a seat there, and far away from Naruko and Sakura. But Shikamaru gave the only remaining stool a kick and sent it gliding closer towards the two girls of Team 10. Hinata shot Shikamaru a brief betrayed look and then took a seat. "I hope you're doing better," Hinata said. From how stiff she looked, it was clear Hinata still expected to be chewed out by either Sakura or Naruko. Mostly Naruko. Sakura and Naruko again exchanged glances. "It's really not possible to stay upset at her when she's like this, is it?" Naruko's look seemed to say. "Nope. Now we don't want to invite more trouble than we're already in, so make your peace," Sakura's look seemed to say. Naruko sighed and said out loud, "It's fine, Hinata. I'm not angry anymore, and Sakura never was." "Told you they'd be reasonable," Shikamaru said from the back of the room, still staring out of the window at the clouds. Some of the tension seemed to leave Hinata's body. "I'm still really sorry about what happened." "As I said, don't worry about it," Naruko said. I can't not worry about it," Hinata said wryly. "I can't help but think of how much worse it could have gone." "Well, we have that in common," Naruko said. "Whatever mistakes you've made, Hinata, they pale in comparison to mine. We're fine." Another light glare from Sakura prompted Naruko to continue. "I was just upset about Sakura being injured and I needed to blame someone." "But I was to blame," Hinata said. "Yeah, I guess. You know, let's just forget about it. Sakura will be better in a few weeks and then we can forget this ever happened. Does that sound like a plan?" "I can't forget about it." Naruko smiled. "Well, it seems to bother you even more than it does me right now, so that's perfect." Sakura punched Naruko's arm. I mean, you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. Just be more careful in the future." Hinata nodded, and that seemed to be the end of that. "Do you mind telling us what happened between you and Gaara?" Shikamaru asked. "There are a lot of rumors out there, but nothing concrete." Naruko braced herself. What happened was a source of shame for her, but she wouldn't try to hide it. "I'll tell you what happened. Minus some really personal bits," Naruko added in her head. "But you'll have to tell me what you've been up to as well." And so they swapped stories. Apparently, Hinata, Sasuke, Shikamaru, and every other genin that had been present in the arena had been drafted to help evacuate the civilians before the big counterattack. They were supposed to stay put after that, but Sasuke had taken it upon himself to go join the fighting afterwards, which had drawn Shikamaru and Hinata into that as well. He'd gotten reprimanded for his actions, regardless of the fact that he had actually been helpful. But Sasuke didn't seem to have been very sorry to hear Shikamaru tell it. About Sasuke, where is he? Training, as usual, of course, Shikamaru said. Could you tell him to drop by Sakura's house, either this evening or tomorrow early morning? That's where I'll be, and I want to talk to him, and I'll be out of the village soon, Naruko said. Is it urgent? Shikamaru asked. No, but it is important. He and I had a understanding of sorts, but I was wrong, and I need to tell him that he is too, if that makes sense. It doesn't, Shikamaru said. But I'll pass by his apartment and tell him to drop by. But if this is another one of your attempts to seduce him, I won't be held responsible. It isn't, I swear, Naruko protested. I just need to tell him that we were wrong. Pursuing revenge at all costs didn't get me anything. It just put those I love in danger, Naruko thought. Good luck. Sasuke-kun is the most stubborn and determined person that I know. Hinata smiled fondly. Getting him to change his mind about anything is a challenge. Naruko and Sakura exchanged glances again, both thinking the same thing. Could Hinata be... Ain't that the truth? Shikamaru sighed. It's a drag, but I'll see it done. He stood up and Hinata did as well. We won't trouble you further. And with that, they left, and Naruko and Sakura also left soon afterwards. This place looks like it's seen better days. Makes you sad, doesn't it? After all, it used to be home for you. No, not at all. Itachi lied. Not that I'm complaining, but isn't it a little early to go after the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki? Shouldn't we at least run this by the boss first? The Leaf Village has never been this weak since the days directly after the Kyuubi's rampage 13 years ago. This is an opportunity we cannot afford to waste, Itachi said. The girl can be held captive until the time comes to extract her bijou. Kisame was right, of course. It was a little early to go after the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, but with the third Hokage's death, Itachi thought it might be a good idea to remind Danzo that he existed. The Kyuubi's Jinchuriki was just an excuse. Not that Itachi actually planned to give the Kyuubi to the Akatsuki. Once he had the Uzumaki girl in his possession, it shouldn't be too hard for him to arrange for the girl's death before her sealing without making a sabotage obvious. The fact that the Kyuubi was supposed to be sealed last should give him plenty of time for such a thing. And with the girl's death, the Akatsuki's goals would be set back several more years. Robbing Konoha of the military asset that was the Kyuubi was regrettable, but considering the forces the Akatsuki had at their disposal, keeping the Kyuubi probably wasn't worth the effort it would take to defend it, if they could even do it. Far be it for me to complain, Kisame grinned. So we just waltz right in, kill anything in our way, grab the target and run? While they probably could just kill anyone that got in their way, Itachi didn't want to weaken the Leaf Village even more than he was already planning to. We sneak in, Itachi decided. He knew that they'd have no problem sneaking into the Leaf Village even if they weren't still reeling from an invasion. In fact, he feared this would be too easy. After all, Itachi wanted everyone to know he had been here. Considering that Kisame had some idea of just how good he was, convincingly faking incompetence was going to be difficult. I still wish I could come with you, Sakura said. They were alone in her bedroom, and were just waiting for Sasuke to come by. There was no guarantee that he would show up, it was getting late after all. But it would be rude not to wait for him when they had invited him over. I don't see why you'd even want to come with me, Naruko said. I thought you wanted out of the whole ninja business. I wanted us to get out of the ninja business because it's dangerous. But it seems like you're going to be in danger anyway, and I want to help. Thanks, Naruko said with a smile, but not meeting her eyes. But I don't really need you. I love you, Sakura, but we know I'm a far better fighter than you. I don't need you to... She was cut off when Sakura threw a pillow at her. If this is going to be the pushing me away to keep me safe thing, then save it. You wouldn't leave me if I were in danger, regardless of ability to help, so don't expect me to. Well, you can't blame me for worrying, Naruko said. You nearly scared me to death when you involved yourself with the QB. You just can't do that to me, please. Sakura just shrugged in response. That had been pretty dumb of her, she could admit that to herself, but she honestly couldn't promise not to do it again. If Naruko had a problem with that, she should just focus on not putting her into that kind of situation. And if you have to help, don't forget that you're my support, Naruko continued. That means no front lines. That's my place. I'm the one that comes up with most of our team strategies, Sakura reminded her. I won't have to take point if you don't fall, so don't ever fall. And then... someone knocked on the door. I can't believe we're just knocking on the door, Kisame grumbled. This place, the home of the Jinchuriki's best friend, was the second place they looked after checking out the Jinchuriki's own apartment. The longer our enemies don't suspect foul play, the better, Itachi said. Yes, because my face just screams everything is fine and sunny, Kisame said, rubbing at the gills on his face. A middle-aged man opened the door. He looked as if he had been expecting someone else. Good evening, sir. We're looking for one Naruko Uzumaki. Do you happen to know where she is? If not, could we ask your daughter about her? Itachi asked. If they couldn't find the Jinchuriki here, they could at least take a hostage to threaten her with. The man paused and seemed to consider his answer carefully. Suspiciously carefully. They're not home. They're both still at the hospital. It was a lie, and Itachi immediately realized it was a lie. He grabbed the man's neck, applied some pressure, and he immediately fell unconscious. The matriarch of the household was able to scream for a fraction of a second before Itachi managed to cover her mouth and knock her out too. Would have been safer to just off them both, Kisame grumbled. You can't threaten corpses, Itachi said, and raised his voice a little. Please don't try to run away, Naruko-chan. Just cooperate, and nobody else needs to get hurt. A few seconds of silence ensued, and then the windows shattered, and tendrils of hair shot forward, attempting to pierce anything in the room. From the way the attack moved, it was clear Uzumaki didn't have any actual vision in the room, and was attacking blind. Itachi just crouched, and the attack went harmlessly over him. The girl was obviously scared of hitting the two fallen adults in the room, which made the floor a safe zone. Kisame didn't seem to have the patience to wait for Uzumaki to come down, and just decided to destroy the ceiling of this floor with his oversized greatsword, causing the rooms above to collapse into the living room. And now everybody in the neighborhood will know that something is going on, Itachi complained, though he wasn't really upset. They wouldn't need very long to just grab the girl and be on their way, and now several people will likely have seen them by the end of this. Besides, Kisame's plan did work. The Kyuubi's Jinchuriki had fallen to the ground level, along with a big chunk of the second floor of the house. She looked rightfully terrified, but he couldn't tell whether she feared for herself or for the family of the house they were wrecking. Itachi also noticed a second girl, clinging to the ceiling and trying, and obviously failing, to not be noticed. If she even had a lick of threat assessment and was smart enough to not interfere and observe only, Itachi was content to just leave her there. She was unimportant now that they had found the Jinchuriki. Is this really the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, container of the strongest of the 9? Kisame mused, sounding disappointed. A terrified little girl is all I see. She is still young, Itachi pointed out. Now that is a shame. It's always sad when a flower gets trampled before it has a chance to bloom. Kisame said, sighing. Let's just cut off her legs and run. Screw you! The girl screamed and again attacked him with her hair. Having a visual on them now, her attack was a lot more accurate this time. Not that her attack got anywhere close to hitting. Itachi made some hand signs that were too fast for the Jinchuriki to follow and spit out a small but white gout of flame which set the girl's hair on fire along with a good chunk of the house. By the way her eyes widened with panic, Itachi guessed nobody had ever used this trick on her before, obvious as he thought that counter to be. She regained her equilibrium soon, however, and attempted to make some more hand signs. A winjutsu, Itachi realized. He had no intention of humoring her, however, and rushed forward to punch her in the stomach, knocking the breath out of her. He had been aiming to knock her unconscious, but she seemed to be clinging on, if barely. He guessed that being the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki had to be good for something. He still lifted the girl over his shoulder and she was too weak to resist. Let's go, before the whole Leaf village descends upon us, Itachi said. That might be fun actually, Kisame said. And as he was saying this, Itachi noticed a small butterfly trying to sneakily land on the back of his neck. With his Sharingan, Itachi immediately realized what this was and where it came from, and he couldn't help but smile. The idea of a girl who seemed to him not far above Genni level skill attempting to use a genjutsu on him of all people was just kind of funny to him. He allowed the butterfly to land and he brushed the genjutsu aside like a maid might brush aside the dust on a flat surface. He didn't even need to make any hand signs. Probably expecting him to be under a genjutsu, the pink-haired girl that had up until this point wisely stayed out of the conflict, now foolishly jumped from the ceiling with a kunai out. Itachi snatched her arm out of the air and held her against the wall. If she was so stupid as to think she could make a difference against him and Kisame, Itachi figured he might as well do his good deed for the day and break her so thoroughly she'd leave the ninja life behind for good. His Sharingan eye met her green ones. Let me show you what genjutsu is really capable of, Itachi said. It was strange. One moment Sakura was launching a desperate sneak attack in order to rescue Naruko, and everything after that she could only remember in a blur. She could vaguely recall red spinning eyes, but after that there was a period of blankness, as if she had dozed off in the middle of one of Iruka-sensei's lectures, and then suddenly jerked back to attention the moment somebody prodded her. When she gathered her wits again, she found herself lying on a flat stone floor, feeling surprisingly good. The lingering injuries from her fight with Hinata were gone, and she felt as fit as ever. The second thing she noticed were the other two people in the room with her. Naruko was there, looking just as disoriented as Sakura felt, and the other person was... Sakura's heart stung. You're not real, she said. Ino, or fake Ino Sakura supposed, took a moment to gather her wits. She too looked as if she had just woken up from a very long nap. After a few tense seconds, Ino's face contracted into a miserable grimace and she answered. Yes, you're right. I'm dead. I should be dead. I can't be here, yet I am. I must be an illusion. Brought here to torment you somehow. However insane Sakura knew it to be, she suddenly felt very sorry for this illusionary version of Ino. How terrible must it be to know you are nothing but an illusion, brought into existence for the sole purpose of tormenting your friends. Fake Ino turned to Naruko. Don't take this the wrong way, Naruko, and try not to freak out, but I fear you may not be real either. Why not? Naruko asked. I sure as hell feel real. This is most likely an illusion in my brain. Nothing in here is real, Sakura said, agreeing with Ino's assessment. Either that or I myself am not real and Naruko is the only real one here, or none of us are, Sakura thought. She didn't voice that idea though. That way lay madness. Yeah, you're probably right, Naruko agreed. She looked disturbed and Sakura couldn't blame her. But if this isn't real, and you know it isn't real, then what's the point? Sakura took another moment to look around. The three of them were in a very large room, almost more like an indoor stadium, that had no doors or windows or any other openings. Just 6 identical flat surfaces for walls, floor and ceiling. There was no visible source of light, yet the room was clearly well lit. Another impossibility that pointed towards none of this being real. One of the first rules of genjutsu that Kurenai had taught her was that it lost most of its effectiveness when your target knew they were under a genjutsu. So what was the point behind all this obvious fakeness? I've got a bad feeling about this, fake Naruko said, standing up. Our enemies are powerful and dangerous. If they put you here, there must be a reason. As Sakura was about to voice her agreement, she heard a familiar sound that caused her to freeze up. The sound of sand moving against sand. It was a sound that still gave her nightmares after everything that had happened with Gaara. Both inside the Forest of Death, where Sakura had nearly died alongside Kiba and Naruko, as well as later with Ino. Sakura turned and through cracks in the wall that she swore hadn't been there a moment before, sand had started to flow into the room. So that's why I'm here, Ino said with a horrified expression. I exist only so that you can see me die again. Not if I can help it, Naruko said, interposing herself between the sand and the other two. Wind style, cutting grade breakthrough! Sakura was forced to close her eyes due to the force of the blast. Thing was though, Sakura already knew this wouldn't work. She had watched how Naruko's wind style jutsus couldn't even slow down Gaara's sand before in the forest. And because of the nature of his room, there was no way for Naruko to use her wind style to just fly them out like before. Tendrils of sand managed to break through the storm of wind and wrap themselves around Naruko's limbs and started to pull her towards the main body of sand. Naruko! Sakura moved to try and rescue her, but Ino held her back. This isn't real, Sakura. Only you matter here, Ino said. Intellectually, Sakura knew that Ino, fake or not, had a point. But even knowing it was a fake, staying put as she saw a struggling Naruko slowly being pulled into the sand was difficult. Sakura, close your eyes! Naruko screamed as her body slowly started to sink into the sand. Sakura did as instructed, but then a voice sounded through the room. Sakura Haruno will continue to bear witness to her friend's fates. It was the same voice as the one who had captured Naruko in the real world. The one she had tried to attack. She saw him hovering in the air, surrounded by crows, looking down on them with an almost bored expression. And from the moment he had spoken, Sakura could neither close or avert her eyes from Naruko anymore. And as she fully sank into the sand, her screams grew muffled. After a few more seconds, there was one last scream of pure agony that was clearly audible, even through the sand, and then the sand imploded and blood flew everywhere. Afterwards, the sand spit out a few bones and chunks of meat that were all that remained of Naruko. It was all very similar to what happened to Ino, the real Ino. That wasn't Naruko. This isn't real, Sakura thought desperately to herself. Ino stepped in front of her, shielding Sakura from Naruko's remains. Not that it worked. Sakura could see Ino perfectly, as well as what was behind her. It made absolutely no logical sense, but it was so. Sakura, nothing that happens here matters, Ino said. To Sakura, Ino looked obviously terrified, but was just trying to stay strong for her sake. Sakura was frozen and could do nothing as the sand came to grab Ino next. You just have to focus on breaking out of here and saving the real Naruko. Hold on, Sakura said, making the release hand sign just as Ino was dragged away to the same fate as what befell Naruko. Release! It didn't work. She couldn't even find the flaw within her mind that should be responsible for the illusion. There was another sickening crunch, and Ino's body was crushed and her remains scattered all over the floor to mix with what was left of Naruko. Again, Sakura had no choice but to see all of it. The sand came for her next. Release! Sakura said again and redoubled her focus. as the sand started to crawl up her leg, she finally found something. The chakra within her mind that wasn't hers and didn't belong. It was so finely integrated within her that it was almost invisible to her senses, but she found it. Congratulations, you can at least locate the chakra which is holding you captive. Itachi's voice sounded again. He said it like an impatient math teacher would congratulate a child that finally grasps that 1 + 1 = 2. Release! Sakura screamed again. But it won't help you, Itachi said. Release! Sakura pushed against the foreign chakra, but it didn't budge. The sand covered her face and then Sakura couldn't breathe anymore. The sand seemed to have no intention of making her end quick though, and started to suffocate her. She continued to try and push against the foreign chakra, but nothing happened. Kurenai had told her that when a genjutsu user knew they were under an illusion, they had a home field advantage when it came to breaking the illusion. After all, it was your mind, your brain. Your chakra was naturally better suited to that battleground than your enemies. But even with that home field advantage, Sakura's will was no match for Itachi's. She felt as if she was trying to defy the will of God himself. Death will be no escape for you, Itachi's voice sounded again. Sakura's lungs burned until her mind panicked and all that remained was the need to breathe, eventually forcing her to open her mouth. Like a drowning person would open their mouth in deep water and swallow water as the last step of drowning. And just like with water, the sand flowed into her mouth and forced its way into her lungs. After one last moment of excruciating pain, everything went black. And then she was back on the stone floor, completely whole and unhurt, as were Naruko and Ino. And the sand was again flowing into the room. And suddenly, the reason why this illusionary world made her whole again made sense. She was made whole, so that there was more of her that could be torn apart each time. I'll be honest, while this is probably worse than what even a professional interrogator could do to you, it's not that much worse, Itachi said. Shall I tell you about all the things that could happen to a Kunoichi that gets captured by enemy forces? Sakura tried to block out Itachi's voice and continued to try and make sense of her current situation. There were several things that just didn't add up. To make an illusion like this, you had to at least know what it was going to do. This illusion was perfect. Too perfect. Sakura knew Ino's mannerisms and they were all there. Same with Naruko. For Itachi to make such a perfect Ino and Naruko, he had to have studied them both extensively, which Sakura thought was very unlikely, especially in the case of Ino. Yet the knowledge about them needed to have come from somewhere. This time, the sand came after all three of them at the same time, and again seemed to take their time with them. The way the sand was just slowly pulling in parts of her body made Sakura feel as if she was being eaten alive by the sand. As soon as her brain made that connection, several tendrils of sand separated and grew mouths and teeth. My own imagination, Sakura realized with horror. One of the mouths came in and bit into her stomach. Sakura screamed as a good chunk of her flesh was ripped off. The monstrous sand thing even made a show of chewing her meat right in front of her eyes before swallowing it. Both Naruko and Ino soon started to receive the same treatment and were slowly being eaten alive. And all the while the room was filled with the screams and crying of all three of the childhood friends. Does telling yourself this isn't real make it hurt less, I wonder? Itachi said. When enough of her body had been eaten so that even the nightmarish logic of this world could no longer convince her she was still alive, Sakura and her friends were again made whole and were back on the stone floor, right where they began. You see, if this were real, at least death would be able to free you eventually. So you see, there are much worse things that can happen to a ninja than death, Itachi continued to say. It had been a relatively short time, yet the torture was already starting to make it hard to think clearly. If Sakura had any hope of finding a way out of this, she had to come up with something fast. This technique used her own imagination against her. It was genjutsu on a level that Sakura had never even known could exist. Yet it left a small opening that she might be able to exploit. If the genjutsu relied on Sakura's own mind and imagination to function, that had to mean that Sakura should be able to exert a small bit of influence over this world. So instead of fighting against the illusion, Sakura tried to fully embrace it instead, to make it even more real, to add her own will and chakra to the foreign chakra keeping her trapped. Her own power seemed so utterly minuscule compared to Itachi's, it was doubtful he even noticed. I see in your eyes that you still haven't given up hope, Itachi said, and the three friends were soon caught by the sand again. Are you perhaps hoping that someone will come to save you? Nobody is coming to save Sakura or her friends. In this world, no salvation is possible for any of you. There was something special about those last two sentences. It was like when he had said that Sakura Haruno would continue to bear witness to her friends' fates, or when he had said that death would be no escape. They were like decrees from God himself, altering the very nature of the reality she was in. Instinctively, Sakura knew that whatever she might be able to come up with to influence this world, she'd never be able to go against those decrees. And so the torture continued. Sometimes the sand started with one of the three friends and forced the other two to watch helplessly. Sometimes it took all three of them at once. All the while, Sakura's own mind, a tool that as a genjutsu user was supposed to be her best weapon, was turned against her as her own imagination continued to come up with new and inventive tortures that could be inflicted upon three young girls. Rejoice, you are close to breaking, Itachi said. When all hope and any hint of defiance has left you, only then will your suffering end. In this current cycle, the Santa decided to destroy Ino first, and Sakura was next. Besides her own pain, she was forced to hear Naruko's wails of despair as she could do nothing as her childhood friends were killed in the most gruesome way possible. Sakura watched as all hope left Naruko's eyes. The Sand hadn't even begun to physically dismantle Naruko yet, but it was clear from the look in her eyes that she was already broken beyond repair. Several monstrous tendrils of sand were greedily sucking the marrow out of Sakura's bones. She was obviously already dead during this cycle. It shouldn't be possible for this to hurt, or for her to continue to watch the events, yet it was. For Naruko's fate had yet to be decided, and Sakura was always forced to bear witness to her friends' fates. Not even the logic of Sakura already being dead could negate that decree from God. It was at this moment that Sakura made her last, desperate play before her mind completely shattered under the torture. Nothing Sakura could do could save any of them, for no salvation was possible for Sakura or her friends. But what happened next didn't violate that rule. Sakura knew Naruko. She knew perfectly well how much she and Ino meant to her. How, regardless of how much stronger Naruko was compared to them, how much of Naruko's psyche relied on their existence. So now, Sakura used what little power she had over this world to make this world follow through on this scenario towards its own natural conclusion. Naruko had been following after Ino and Sakura for almost as long as Sakura could recall. Even after she had become the #1 girl in the academy, Sakura knew that little girl that would obediently follow all of their instructions and chase after them like a lost puppy never truly went away. And so it was now that Sakura made this version of Naruko chase after Ino and Sakura in the only way she was still able. Sakura's vision shifted to bear witness to her lost friend's fate. And so she saw Naruko, with a crazed, broken smile on her face, eagerly, unhesitatingly, rip the seal from the Kyuubi's cage. In this world, no salvation could exist for Sakura or her friends. And so no hope for Naruko was allowed to exist in the form of long-dead parents coming to her rescue. And thus nothing prevented the Kyuubi from breaking out of its cage and snatching Naruko up in its massive claws. The beast roared in triumph and squeezed, and Naruko's tiny body was turned to pulp in an instant. And then the whole world exploded. Itachi Uchiha was probably one of the few people that might be able to take on the full Kyuubi in a fair fight. But this was Sakura's worst nightmare. And in Sakura's worst nightmare, nothing more powerful than the Kyuubi was allowed to exist. To Sakura, the Kyuubi was the end of the world personified. Nothing could ever stand against it. not even the god responsible for this world's creation. And so Itachi didn't even have a chance to react as the full might of the Kyuubi slammed into him. And in that moment, Sakura Haruno, average student, average talent, no special bloodline, genin for half a year, defeated the single most powerful master of genjutsu that was currently alive at his own game. In the real world, only a few seconds had passed. The technique Itachi had used hadn't been Tsukiyomi. He hadn't considered Sakura worthy of such a technique, but it had still held some time perception distorting powers. Sakura fell limp towards the ground, her mind completely catatonic and nearly broken from the torture she had experienced. All Itachi suffered was a single moment of being staggered. He held his hands in front of him as if shielding himself from an invisible blow. Yet that was all. A single moment of vulnerability, and then whatever advantage Sakura had bought with her struggle would be used up and disappear. Yet in a moment of truly spectacular timing, it was at that moment that Sasuke Uchiha came charging and screaming into the house with his Chidori. Even with this small bit of miraculously good timing, Itachi still managed to partially dodge to the side to prevent his heart from being pierced. Yet he didn't avoid the attack completely as he otherwise would have. And Sasuke's Chidori cut a deep bloody wound through Itachi's side. After that, Itachi's mind went into full shit just got real combat mode, and his eyes morphed into the Mangekyo Sharingan. He had to act fast here. Even from this little bit of exposure, Itachi realized that Sasuke was still too weak. It was still too soon to allow himself to be killed. Sasuke had just inflicted a near mortal wound, yet he couldn't be allowed to think he was anywhere close to the level he had to be at. Itachi grabbed Sasuke by his throat, locked eyes with him, and began the work of convincing him that the last few seconds of reality had in fact been nothing but an illusion, and reaffirming Sasuke's desire to kill him and need to be stronger through more mental torture. After that though, and after Sasuke fell into a coma, Itachi fell to his knees. His Akatsuki robes were already starting to get stained red with blood. Kisame, meanwhile, was watching all of this with a stunned expression. Itachi was strong, probably even stronger than him, and seeing him brought to his knees by a bunch of kids was just ridiculous. He had in fact spent several seconds convinced that he himself was under a genjutsu and had been trying to break the non-existent illusion before realizing that, yes, this was indeed happening. Suddenly, fighting the entirety of the Leaf Village seemed a lot less fun to him. Itachi had dropped the Jinchuriki at the same time the pink-haired girl had done whatever she may have done. He would have asked her himself if she wasn't currently lying in a pool of her own vomit, and clearly not in the state to answer questions. Sakura! Sakura! The Jinchuriki looked panicked as she hovered over the girl, but soon gathered her wits and then decided that grabbing everyone with her hair, including Sasuke, Sakura and her parents, and running was her best option. Kisame would have stopped her if his brain hadn't still been stuck on the impossibility of Itachi getting near mortal wounds from a bunch of kids. Only when the first explosion started hitting the house did he get jerked back into action. He could still chase the Jinchuriki down, even while under enemy fire, but he understood that Itachi wouldn't be able to fight with that wound for very long. Hell, forget fighting. He'd die from blood loss if he didn't treat that wound soon. "We have to leave," Kisame said. "But I expect you to tell me what the hell just happened once we're safe." "Yeah, I got caught off guard is all," Itachi said, his voice sounding weak. "Fuck that! Someone like you doesn't make mistakes like that, but we'll save that for later," Kisame said, and then grabbed Itachi and slung him over his shoulder. "Hold on." And then suddenly, in the middle of Konoha, a giant tsunami appeared that carried the two rogue ninja out of Konoha, destroying another decent section of the village in the process. Several Leaf Ninja tried to stop him, but Kisame simply bulldozed through them. It was a shame that they hadn't been able to take the Uzumaki girl, but right now his partner needed help. "You're in luck, girl," Kisame thought. "It seems you might get to enjoy a few more years of life after all. Better make the best of them, because you won't get so lucky next time." Jiraiya had insisted that he got the hospital room that he did, specifically because it gave him a somewhat decent view of both Naruko's apartment, as well as the Haruno residence. And so he noticed that something was wrong when he saw the smoke coming from Sakura's house, and he had immediately jumped out of the window and headed to the scene, despite his injuries. When he saw the giant tsunami wrecking a path through Konoha, he had feared the worst and thought that Naruko was being carried out of the village right then and there. He was just about to give chase, futile though he knew that would be given his injuries, when a frantic Naruko came crashing out of a back alley. Her hair, which looked a little singed to him, was elongated and carrying Sakura, 2 adults, and another kid. "Master Jiraiya!" she screamed, her eyes nearly tearing up in relief when she spotted him. "They did something to Sakura! You have to help!" She deposited all 4 of her passengers at his feet. The adults looked nearly unconscious, but Sakura and the other kid both had the signs of someone that had been tortured through the use of genjutsu. "She tried to save me!" Naruko stammered out, holding one of Sakura's hands in both of her own. "There was nothing I could do. They defeated and caught me easily, and then Sakura tried to save me, and now she's hurt even worse." "It's not your fault," Jiraiya said. "Like hell it isn't! I can handle being in danger. Fuck, I can handle losing and dying. I can't handle this. Please, I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Naruko," Jiraiya said in a harsher tone, getting her to stop panicking and listening to him. He got down to eye level with her and put a hand on her shoulder. "Tonight, you and Sakura stay at the hospital. Tomorrow we leave, and then nobody will know where to find you." "And Sakura?" Naruko asked. "She can stay here in the hospital." To Jiraiya's surprise, it seemed that Sakura wasn't quite as dead to the world as she appeared. The moment she suggested Naruko was about to leave the village without her, she screamed and started to cling to Naruko like a limpet. Naruko didn't seem to mind and started to stroke her back in an attempt to reassure her. Strangely, doing so seemed to calm Naruko as well. "I'm not leaving Sakura. Not now," Naruko said. "She'll be safer away from you," Jiraiya pointed out. This seemed to give Naruko pause, but Sakura again proved that she understood what was being discussed by clinging even tighter to Naruko, clearly terrified of being separated from her. "She stays with me," Naruko insisted. "Can she even walk?" "I'll carry her if I have to, but I'm not leaving her side. Not now. Besides, we're going to look for the best healer in the world, aren't we? Then I'm personally bringing Sakura to her if it's the last thing I do." And that was that. Jiraiya got the impression that Naruko would sooner stay in the village without him than leave Sakura behind. He could, of course, force the issue, but he really didn't want to do that. He wanted Naruko to trust him, and considering his recent failures in protecting her from both the Kyuubi as well as the Akatsuki, she was due a favor. Besides, Jiraiya started to think that there was some tactical sense in keeping Sakura close. Protecting Naruko was his top priority, but if their enemies ever realized the extent of the bond between Naruko and Sakura, all they need to do is take the latter hostage and Naruko would likely surrender herself without a fight. After some prodding, Jiraiya was able to get the full story out of Naruko as she knew it. It wasn't a very comprehensive report, as Naruko had lost sight of everything else the moment Sakura went down. According to her, she had almost forgotten that she needed to bring Sasuke and the adults to safety as well, and brought only Sakura. Such tunnel visioning was worrying. Still, Jiraiya gave his report, such as it was, to the village leadership. There was some talk of keeping Naruko safe, read high security prisoner, for a while, but Jiraiya wouldn't hear of it, and his words carries more weight than anyone else's right now. When he got back to the hospital, Naruko and Sakura had already found a bed together, and were half asleep. A bed, singular. Even though these were meant to be single-person beds, they were sharing. It would have looked cute if Jiraiya didn't know better. These were 2 girls who had been exposed to trauma upon trauma upon trauma upon tragedy. They had both reached the end of their rope, and were now desperately clinging to the one thing that could give them comfort, namely each other. Friendship was all well and good, but after this, Jiraiya suspected that these two would end up developing a strong case of codependence, if that hadn't already been there before. As Jiraiya came closer, he found a deep familiar anger come over him. What kind of fucked up world was it that forced children to shoulder these kinds of burdens? He pulled up a chair and sat down and very carefully stroked Naruko's cheek. Her eyes flew open and stared at him. "I'll stay here and watch over the two of you tonight. I swear, I will not move from this chair." Under normal circumstances, having some old guy watching her sleep would have been creepy, but right now, the simple base desire of wanting to feel safe overrode any such concerns. Naruko gave a minute nod and closed her eyes again. And though there was a chance Jiraiya might be imagining it, he felt as though there was just a little less desperation in the way the two girls clung to each other now. That, Jiraiya figured, was as much of a victory as he was going to get today. And that's where I'll be leaving this chapter. Nikes out.